When I raised this question with him previously, he talked about security considerations. Will he disregard security considerations around children who are about 5 or 6 years old? And will he set out the plans to bring these children home?
I thank the honourable gentleman who puts his points in his usual effective and forceful way. It is right to point out that the UK has been right at the forefront of applying international development funding to this dire situation in northeast Iraq. We are right at the front of the league table, and I think it's important to say that. So particularly as winter approaches, it's of vital importance the British public know that their money is being spent to alleviate as far as they possibly can this dire humanitarian situation. In terms of other countries, I'm not going to be drawn on others, because it's invidious to do so, and it's very easy just to pluck out a couple of countries from the air and say we're not doing as well as X or Y. Let me be clear, we're doing what we can, given the difficult circumstances on the ground, of course within the rule of law, for vulnerable children in northeast Syria. This is a piece that is rapidly developing, rapidly changing, and of course we keep all things under review. I hope that's helpful to the honourable gentleman.
Mr. Crispin Blunt.
Speaker, declaring my interest both as an expert witness in the defence of John Letts and Sally Lane in respect of the non-provision of consular services in that region, evidence that was unchallenged by the prosecution, as well as my interest in respect of a visit to the region with 3 other parliamentary colleagues with the All-Party Parliamentary Group 5 weeks ago. In Al Hul camp, we were told there were 16 British families there. And I have to say to my right honourable friend that every single day we delay in actually bringing these children home is a day extra of trauma that we are going to have to address at great expense in the United Kingdom. But we must take up our responsibilities both to the children and to ourselves in order to protect our future security.
Yes, I do pay tribute to my honourable friend's first-hand experience in Syria and the efforts he's made to better understand what's going on. I have to say that the situation in northeast Syria is difficult and unpredictable. We have a ceasefire at the moment. I hope it endures, because if that ceasefire does hold tonight into tomorrow and to the future, I think the situation becomes much more permissive in terms of trying to deliver assistance where it's necessary, and also dealing with the cases that he has referred to, and in particular the orphaned children, the unaccompanied minors who are deeply vulnerable. I agree with him entirely. As every day that goes past, it's these children potentially getting even more and more deeply disadvantaged, and I want this resolved. At the moment, we are working with agencies to do what we can. In the event this ceasefire holds, I think things will hopefully move a lot more rapidly, and we'll be able to do more.
And Clwyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But surely now is the perfect time to facilitate repatriation. Ceasefire, lull in the fighting. Now is the time to get them out. And can the Minister tell us what numbers he's talking about? We don't want the wool pulled over our eyes yet again, because I understand that only 3 of the children are orphans out of the 60 who are British families. So what numbers are we talking about precisely? We don't want just 3 children taken out, we want the 60 taken out and their mothers.
Well, can I thank the right honourable gentleman who has taken a very long-term interest in this, and I do pay tribute sorry, the right honourable lady. My apologies. I mean no disrespect to the right honourable lady. At least I got the first bit right. What I would say to her is I would diverge from the pretext of her question, which is that we haven't been doing anything. I can tell her, though I'm not going to be drawn on the detail, that we actually have over the past 4 days. Now, the ceasefire finishes tonight. Now, I hope that it endures, in which case things become, I think, a lot more permissive, a lot easier. We hope that is the case. I'm sorry to disappoint the Honourable Lady, going to be drawn on precise numbers. I don't recognise the figure that was given earlier on. I do respect the authority that has produced that number, but I can't confirm a number anywhere in that region. And I also, I'm afraid, do not want to be drawn in this forum on the precise cases, the 3 that she has referred to. She will understand that we are actively trying to do what we can for them, and I don't want to prejudice anything that we do in country by saying something at the dispatch box that might prejudice that. But I'm perfectly happy to have a conversation with her in private.
Alistair Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for the question and say how much I sympathise with my right honourable friend in dealing with it, because he, with the Foreign Secretary, has the responsibility in this House actually to work out the practicalities of the respective duties of care of those he would send to rescue those who are trapped in this situation abroad with their needs and everything else. However, could I say to my right honourable friend, sometimes the sheer practicality of difficulties can mask a failure in government to make the decisions it needs to make. And I think particularly this is about the mothers of the children. It has seemed to me over a period of time that we have to recognise an international responsibility to take back even those who have been indoctrinated and radicalised in order to protect the children, and that we should have the resources to be able to deal with them as well as to protect the children who are the only innocents by and large in this situation. And could he reassure me that in government now there is a clear decision being made with the Home Office to bring people back and they should be cared for here?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. He will know that we're trying to better understand the situation in Al Hol in particular at the moment, and to try to identify those who have British nationality, their position, their wishes, and in particular trying to enumerate those who might be considered to be vulnerable in this piece. What I said earlier was we're approaching this on a case-by-case basis. Genuinely, that is the case. It is not easy because our access is obviously imperfect. I hope very much that if this ceasefire holds, then we will be able to do more than perhaps we have been able to do up to this point.
Speaker, the Minister has alluded several times to the 5-day window expiring tonight. Can he outline, even in general terms, what steps he expects to take this afternoon and this evening before that expiry?
Well, as I said in my remarks earlier on, we have been working over the past several days, indeed for some considerable time, to better understand the situation in Al Hol camp in particular. That is to say, to satisfy ourselves, we know who's there, who we might have responsibility for in some way or another, moral or legal, and work up a plan on how to deal with that. That is irrespective of the ceasefire, but the ceasefire is important because it makes things a lot easier when we're planning trying to get in place a plan to assist those who we think we have a duty towards.
Penny Morden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand very well the ethical, legal and practical difficulties of repatriating children, especially those that are not orphans. Many of the partners that we work with would not want to take a child from their parents, even in these circumstances. But surely our hand would be strengthened in being able to do the right thing if taking a child to a war zone and all the horrors that accompany it were seen as a form of child abuse. Would the Minister please ask government lawyers to look at this to see whether we can strengthen our hand in taking children back who are not orphans, and also that we have more in our arsenal to be able to prosecute those who have taken children overseas?
I thank my right honourable friend. She's fully familiar with all of this territory. Of course, some of the children will have been born in Syria. So I think that probably just illustrates the complexity of this that I referred to earlier, and why we need to take an individual approach to each and every case. In general, of course, it is absolutely right that a child should not be separated from its mother in particular. I think that's a very, very strong principle that we should adhere to. But as I say, this is rapidly evolving, and we have to consider each case individually.
Richard Burden.
The Minister has acknowledged there's absolutely no time to lose here. And whilst the current ceasefire presents a particular window of opportunity to move on these repatriations, will the Minister accept that the two camps where the majority of UK national children are currently living, access was possible and repatriation was possible before the ceasefire and is likely to be possible for a little while afterwards? And whilst he is not prepared to be drawn on the performance of other countries, all the indications are that a number of other countries are able to get their nationals out quicker than we are managing to do. Why is that?
Well, I'm not sure I would agree entirely with what I read in the Guardian newspaper, and I would certainly disagree with the characterisation that he has portrayed. It's just I have no evidence to suggest that the UK is in any way being dilatory in trying to return vulnerable children to the United Kingdom. It's absolutely not the case. We will continue to do what we can and have been very active up to this point in trying to work out the next steps. All I can do is to reassure him on that point.
Sir Michael Fallon.
Whilst we should certainly care about the children, we should also continue to worry about some of the parents who still constitute an extreme threat to us here in the United Kingdom, and against whom our armed forces have spent 5 years trying to protect us. Can my honourable friend say what work is being done in the coalition to ensure that some of those parents are not inadvertently released?
Minister.
Well, I regret that the Turkish incursion has really not helped this position, in that it is likely that some of the places in which these foreign fighters have been held will become, should we say, a little more porous as a result. I think early suggestion that this would mean that the doors were opened and that they were simply released had probably been overdone. That's not our sense at the moment. But certainly it does pose a very real risk, and I think my right honourable friends, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, are being absolutely right in saying that public safety must be ensured, and we would want to see those who may have committed offences brought to justice. Our view is that such cases should be tried close to their alleged crimes, and that remains our position.
Chukwuemeka.
Mr. Speaker, and I congratulate the right honourable gentleman on bringing this urgent question and agree with every single word he has said. Can I ask the Minister, in the event that we are able to repatriate these children, of course, as has already been said, they have witnessed and seen and experienced things no adult, never mind any child, should have to experience. They are likely to be suffering from quite severe psychological and physical conditions. What package of support will be put in place for them in the event that we actually bring them home? Because they are going to need all the help they can get.
I'm really pleased the right honourable gentleman has raised that. He's of course absolutely right, and I think safeguarding is vitally important when these children return to the UK. He will understand, since he is a constituency MP as I am, that local social services are principally responsible for the care of vulnerable children. That will remain the case in this case. And we would be working with the statutory agencies to ensure that children who are repatriated to this country, who may be traumatised in ways that most of us can barely imagine, are given every care that they require. And I suspect it will be ongoing and very lengthy.
Sir Hugo Swire.
Can the Minister clarify whether there is a legal distinction between those children born in the so-called caliphate and those taken there? And for the avoidance of doubt, can he also clarify that the government today is talking solely about unaccompanied and orphaned children? Because if we are introducing the element where a parent is involved, that opens a whole range of other possibilities and challenges.
Minister.
Well, my right honourable friend is right to touch upon the legality of this, which is complicated. But we're clear there are British nationals in camps in Syria that have the rights he would expect from a British national. If they are born of British parents, they would naturally be expected to have British nationality, just like any other child born in any other country. To deal with the distinction between unaccompanied children and other children, which other right honourable members have made today, our principal concern, our priority has to be unaccompanied and orphan children. They are the most vulnerable, and that's where our attention chiefly is at this moment. However, I would say to my right honourable friend, who's got some experience in these matters, that this is a bigger piece of work that I hope will be made considerably easier in the event that we have a sustained ceasefire when the current ceasefire ends this evening.
Mr. Andrew Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rather than dealing with children on a case-by-case basis and risking some of the parents being released and causing further mayhem, isn't the solution to repatriate all UK citizens, and if any are guilty or suspected of commission of offences, putting them on trial?
Well, I have to say from my conversations with my international interlocutors yesterday, that does not appear to be the approach taken by most countries. What I would say to him is that the government clearly has a duty to protect the public, his constituents and my constituents, and that's at the forefront of our mind. In terms of dealing with foreign terrorist fighters, our view is very firmly that any alleged crime should be tried close to the scene of those alleged crimes. Justice is best served by that, and that's what we are attempting to achieve. He has to accept that repatriating foreign terrorist fighters makes it more difficult to mount successful prosecutions and thus protect the public.
Maria Miller.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right that these British children are vulnerable, innocent minors. But that's the case whether they're orphaned or not. So can my right honourable friend really be clear what DFID funded partners are doing to ensure that we've identified all British children who are caught up in this appalling situation, and that it is the government's objective to make sure that they have identified them, because we have an obligation to them all, and our duty really should be clear to them.
Minister.
Yes, well, we want to assist all vulnerable children. I hope I've made that very clear. Now, the reason I said I didn't recognise a 50 of 60 wasn't because I was trying to obfuscate from the dispatch box, Mr. Speaker. It's because we genuinely don't know, and it is extremely difficult to determine who they are and how many there are. That is a piece of work that is ongoing, and I hope that a more benign situation in northeast Syria will assist in that process, so that we will indeed be able to provide something like an individual service to those who are in the camps, particularly those who are most vulnerable and their family members. And that's what we will seek to achieve to do. But her point is absolutely well made.
Angela Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister has made a great deal of his hope that the ceasefire will hold. But of course it may not hold. So can I ask him, how is the Foreign Office planning to respond to the end of the ceasefire in terms of its processes for repatriating those British children?
Well, that process is not dependent upon the end of the ceasefire. My point was it's made a great deal easier in the event that the security situation on the ground is more benign, more permissive. It makes our job a great deal easier. But our work in terms of repatriating, in particular the priority cases, which have to be orphans and unaccompanied minors, will continue nevertheless.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister has set out a number of the practical challenges involved in acting in this area. But can the Minister confirm the reports that many of us have heard that a number of other countries, including some of our allies, are already in the process of repatriating children from that area of Syria? And can he confirm whether they're adopting a similar approach that he seems to be adopting today, drawing a distinction between unaccompanied children and orphans and the wider body of children who may be there?
I believe that is the case. I do not discern a dramatic difference between the approach taken by countries with which we could reasonably be compared, that is to say, the countries that we habitually speak to in this matter. I think there's a commonality of understanding that we need to ensure that those who are most vulnerable are prioritised. That's what we're doing, and it's a process that is underway, and he refers to a process being underway. I can assure him the UK process itself is underway, and it seems to me to be in parallel with most countries.
Mrs. Madeline Moon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I trust the Minister's integrity and honesty, and when he has been vague about the actions that are being taken, I accept his assurance that actions are happening. But the House still requires an assurance, not only that those orphans that have been identified will be repatriated, but that we will look at those children who are with their mothers, because they cannot but fail to have been traumatised. Can I also suggest to the Minister he looks at the work of PAM, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean, who have been asked by the UN and Washington to look at putting together a system and a scheme for looking at justice for foreign fighters as well.
Minister.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for her comments. Her tone, as ever, is absolutely correct and spot on. I mean, I agree with her. We need to apply compassion to all in this situation. We also, of course, need to bring justice, who need to be brought before the courts, and I am very interested in the report that she has cited, and I will certainly take a very close look at it.
Tim Lawton.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I completely concur with the comments of my right honourable friend and the Minister that these children are the innocent victims of their parents' actions and we owe them a duty of care. But since the law was changed in 2013, more than 150 children have been taken into the care system in the UK for fear of the risk of radicalisation from their parents. And if the parents of these children were in the UK, those children hopefully now would be in the safety of either extended family members, the care of expert foster carers, or even adoption. So will he agree with me that if we can rescue these children safely, then we should work to find them safe homes in the UK, whatever the status of their parents?
Minister.
Yes, I thank my honourable friend for that. And I think it's a reasonable analogy to draw, because we're dealing with UK law, and these children ultimately will be returned to the UK, and we need to use the same standards and norms and principles, in my view, with these children as we would apply in the UK. I note his point. He will understand that the piece of work underway at the moment is trying to identify precisely where these families are, who they are, and what can be done. The numbers, I do not think, are vast. So unfortunately, no, he's right to say from a sedentary position it does not matter. These are individual cases. But the press reporting 70,000 in our whole camp, for example, gives the impression that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people in the frame for this. I can say without betraying any confidences, that would be a grave exaggeration. So we're talking about a relatively small number of people. This should be a containable piece of work, and it is, I can assure him, underway.
Stevens.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister tell us, or he will be aware, that there are different interpretations, particularly from those on the ground, of the Ankara-Washington ceasefire, and is that hampering the government and agencies' attempts to repatriate children? I want to give a larger commitment that the UK government needs to increase the number of children it's resettling here in the UK.
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman. I think he's probably raised something similar before in terms of the vulnerable persons resettlement scheme, which I have to say I'm very proud of. 20,000 people by 2020, I think, is a big commitment, particularly when it's taken along with our financial commitment to this dreadful humanitarian crisis in Syria. He mentions the ceasefire and what has been done. I can assure him we have used every opportunity to do what we can in relation to vulnerable people in North East Syria during this period of time. We'll continue to do so, I hope very much, assisted by a continuation of the ceasefire, and we have to hope for the best this evening.
Dr. Philip Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When one looks at the bigger picture here, the position of these British children, and indeed our national security, has been adversely impacted upon by the invasion of northeast Syria by a NATO country following the exit of northeast Syria by a NATO country. Does the Minister agree with me that it is beholden upon all political generations to review how supranational organisations work so that they continue to work in Britain's national interest?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that. He mentions, I think he alludes to Turkey as a member of NATO and its behaviour. All I can say to him is I'm very disappointed by Turkey's behaviour in this respect as a trusted NATO friend and ally, and I would hope very much that it would desist from further incursion into Turkey and de-escalate. Otherwise, I think the consequences are going to be very serious indeed.
Jim Cunningham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Children's services are overstretched at the moment in relation to children's services in this country. Will the Minister ensure that adequate resources are made available to deal with this particular situation? And secondly, can I ask the Minister this? Is he waiting for a ruling from the courts in relation to British nationality? Because I've noticed he said unaccompanied children. There could be accompanied children given that result. Has he got contingency plans for that?
Yes, what I would say to the honourable gentleman, I suppose referring to the points I made earlier about the scale of this, I think it's containable. Clearly, in terms of social services, it's a responsibility of local social services to deal with this, notwithstanding the specialist nature of some of the services that will have to be provided to the vulnerable people concerned. But I think I can give him the assurances that he seeks in relation to vulnerable children returning to this country and having what they need in terms of specialist services to ensure their welfare and their rehabilitation.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Kate has written to share her concerns on the intensifying and dangerous situation facing these children stuck in camps. Can he confirm, though, and can he put beyond any doubt that the UK Government accepts its duty of care for these children, and will it take its responsibility for these British citizens?
Yes, I mean, you know, we do look at each case individually. I can give her that assurance, and I don't want to get wrapped up with a strict legalistic interpretation of duty of care. What I want to do is to ensure that we apply our moral duty to do what we can for British nationals, that is to say, innocent British nationals, and I think I can give her that assurance.
Chris Law.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm still left a little bit perplexed about particularly your last response. Can you confirm a yes or no answer? Are all these young British children a legal responsibility that are a legal responsibility to Britain and the UK government, or are they not?
Minister.
Well, I mean, the difficulty is, of course, if they're not unaccompanied, they're not orphaned, they are in the care of their parents. I think he's confusing two things. It is important that we ensure that children, wherever is possible, in this country and anywhere else, remain in the care of their parents. As a parent, I can say that it's vitally important that children remain in a family setting. That's what we will seek to ensure. The state abrogating responsibility for children, I have to say, is an extreme measure, and we will seek, wherever we possibly can, to keep families together.
Thank you. I'm most grateful to the Minister and to colleagues for taking part. Yes, points of order. The day wouldn't be complete without them. A point of order, Thangam Debonair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A point of order, I'd like to ask your advice about what measures you think the House should be taking to deal with the possible security risk of the government's programme motion, which tomorrow sets us up so that all members, staff and others will all be leaving at the same time when there is no public transport and the likelihood that there won't be enough taxis. Ministers may be able to go home in their ministerial cars. For everyone else, including staff, this is surely a security risk. What advice can you give us about what precautions we can take?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for her point of order. I haven't got immediate advice, I will consult the Parliamentary Security Director and report back to the House as expeditiously as I can. She has raised a serious point. It does warrant a serious response, and a serious response has to be a considered one based upon consultation. I hope that that's helpful to her for now. Yes, of course. Point of order, Justine Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House is about to start a vitally important debate for our country's future national interest, and yet we have just a few hours to debate the principles of this bill, and then after that, just a few more hours in a matter of a couple of days in this House to table and debate amendments to this bill, which itself is not just a few clauses, but 115 pages long with a long explanatory text. This House, Mr. Speaker, has a duty of care to the people of our country to make sure we scrutinise and amend legislation and hold the government to account as appropriate. It is simply not possible to do this under the current programme motion, and yet there is no chance to even debate those issues about what an appropriate amount of time for the programme motion would be. We'll simply have a vote on it. And can you give the House, therefore, some advice around an appropriate amount of time to take on this bill, but perhaps more importantly, your reflections on the importance of the duty of care this House holds to the British people to make sure legislation that we will all have to live under is scrutinised properly?
Well, everybody who has a responsibility to make a judgment, which means to vote on this matter, has an equal responsibility to study the legislation as carefully as possible before either speaking or voting. I recognise the very real constraint that now applies to members trying to discharge that obligation, but doing anything about that is not within the gift of the chair. What I would say to the Right Honourable Lady and others is that the House has ownership of this matter, in the sense that the House is ultimately the determinant of the allocation of time, and the House will have to make its own judgment about that. But I do not treat lightly what the Right Honourable Lady has said. If she talks to others and they feel like-minded, well, they must make their own representations or reach their own judgment as to how to proceed. We will have to leave it there, I'm afraid, for now. Order. I can inform the House that I've now considered advice on the certifiability of the European Union Withdrawal Agreement Bill, under Standing Order number 83J, with which colleagues are all, I'm sure, closely familiar, certification of bills, etc., relating exclusively to England or England and Wales and being within devolved legislative competence, and I've concluded that the bill does not meet the criteria for certification. Order. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
European Union Withdrawal Agreement Bill, second reading.
Now. Thank you. I can inform the House that I have not selected either of the reasoned amendments. To move the second reading, I call the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I beg to move that the bill be read a second time, and that we come together now in the very best traditions of this House to scrutinise this legislation and then take the decision that this country expects to make the verdict of the British people the law of the land, so that we can leave the European Union with our new deal on October the 31st. Mr. Speaker, I of course wish that this decision on our national future had been taken through a meaningful vote on Saturday, but I respect perfectly the motives of my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, though I disagree with the effects of his amendment. And I regret too that after Saturday's vote, the government has been forced to act on the advice of the Cabinet Secretary and to take the only responsible course, which is to accelerate our preparations for a no-deal outcome. But today, Mr. Speaker, we have the opportunity to put all that right. Because if this House backs this legislation, if we ratify this new deal, which I believe is profoundly in the interest of our whole United Kingdom and our European friends, we can get Brexit done and move our country on. And we can de-escalate those no-deal preparations immediately and turn them off next week, and instead concentrate on the great enterprise of building a new relationship of the closest cooperation and friendship, as I said on Saturday, with our European neighbours, and addressing our people's priorities at home. And I give way with pleasure to the right honourable gentleman.
A number of people before they vote today will be very concerned about various rights which are enshrined in Europe, but which might be vulnerable if and hopefully when we leave. One of those sets of rights will be on rights for working people. Would the Prime Minister give an undertaking? So we have it on the record. The bill is quite clear. If the government agrees with enhanced rights to working people, that will become the law of the land here. If the government disagrees with a single one or a number of enhanced rights, will he give an undertaking that he will bring those proposals before the House? Will we have the chance to vote and instruct the government to accept them, please?
Mr. Speaker, I can of course give the right honourable gentleman that assurance that not only will this country maintain the highest standards both for environmental protection and also of course for workers' rights, but in the event that this House wishes to have higher standards than those proposed by the EU, or if this House wishes to adopt standards proposed by the EU and the government disagrees, there will of course be an amendable motion to give this House the opportunity to have its say, and we will ensure that that is the case. And Mr. Speaker, if we pass this bill tonight, we will have the opportunity to address the priorities not just of our relations with the EU, but people's priorities at home. And I believe that if we do this deal, if we pass this deal and the legislation that enables it, we can turn the page and allow this Parliament and this country to begin to heal and unite. For those like me who believe our interests are best served by leaving the European Union and taking back control, this deal delivers the biggest restoration of sovereignty in our parliamentary history and the biggest devolution of power to UK democratic institutions. I'll give way with pleasure.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for giving way and absolutely recognise that people who voted for Brexit did not necessarily vote on economic lines. However, the government is refusing to publish an impact assessment of this deal. He is expecting MPs to vote for something that we know will damage this country economically without revealing the impact assessment. What does this government have to hide?
Prime Minister. If I may say to the honourable lady, I understand the point that she makes, but she's had an answer, I believe, from my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, yesterday. And I think it will be clear to everybody that the best way to avoid any disruption from a no-deal Brexit is to vote for this deal today, to vote for this bill, to get it done. And I think that will unleash a great tide of investment into this country and a demonstration of confidence in the UK economy. And by voting for this deal tonight, we will deliver a powerful, positive shot in the arm for the UK economy. And I hope very much that she does so. Once more, under this agreement, British people will be able to live under laws made by representatives whom they elect and who they alone can elect and remove. Laws enforced by British judges in British courts. I'll give way to my right honourable.
Well, I'm most grateful to the Prime Minister for giving way. But he must recognise that the arrangements he has come to for Northern Ireland precisely don't deliver that for the people of Northern Ireland. Of course, that may be a matter where in Northern Ireland opinion will be divided as to whether they want it or not. But the reality is that the vassalage clauses, as I think were described by the right honourable member of the Leader of the House in the past, are going to continue to apply to Northern Ireland after the transition is ended for the rest of Great Britain. How does he square that with the recovery of sovereignty promised to the entirety of the British people?
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman, but I think we can square that with very simply by pointing out that, yes, of course, there are arrangements, transitory arrangements for some aspects of the Northern Ireland economy, but those automatically dissolve and are terminated after 4 years, unless it is the majority decision of the Assembly of Northern Ireland to remain in alignment with those arrangements, either in whole or in part. And the principle of consent is therefore at the heart of these arrangements. Under this bill, British farmers will escape the frequently perverse effects of the common agricultural policy. British fishermen, liberated from arcane quotas, will be free to fish in a way that is both more sensible and more sustainable. And this House will be free to legislate for the highest possible standards. I'll give way with pleasure to the Right Honourable Lady of.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be well aware that there are actually 4 pages in his bill which address and enlarge the responsibilities of the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission and the Northern Ireland Equality Commission. That's all very well and good, but there is not a single sentence in this bill which explains the new consent process contained in the Prime Minister's Brexit deal. I say very clearly to the Prime Minister, do not take the people of Northern Ireland for fools. We are not fools. The Prime Minister needs to explain in detail how his new consent process operates. In detail, please.
Prime Minister.
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady, and of course the process for consent is set out in detail in the unilateral declaration made between us and the Republic of Ireland, and she will understand that it is, as I have indicated to the House, a process by which there are a small minority of economic arrangements in which Northern Ireland remains in alignment for sanitary and phytosanitary and for manufactured goods for 4 years, unless and until, by a majority vote of the Stormont Assembly, Northern Ireland elects to remain in alignment. Otherwise, for the vast majority of the Northern Irish economy, of course, Northern Ireland exits with the rest of the UK whole and entire, able to do free trade deals from the outset, able to participate in all the other benefits of Brexit. And I hope that point will commend itself to the Right Honourable Lady. I give way with pleasure to my Right Honourable friend.
I'm grateful to the Prime Minister, and can I congratulate the Prime Minister to getting us to this critical point in the long Brexit journey. Relating to Clause 36, parliamentary sovereignty, could I invite the Prime Minister to confirm the UK will retain its own sovereign military capability as outlined in para 92 and 99 of the Political Declaration, and not be committed to any EU mission, military initiative or procurement project unless we do so voluntarily?
Prime Minister.
I'm very grateful to my Right Honourable friend, and he alludes to an important change that we've been able to secure in the course of the negotiations, and he is absolutely right that full independence will be retained in that vital sphere of defence and security. I'm grateful to him for drawing attention to it. Let me just make a little bit of progress, if I may, Mr. Speaker. This House will be free not only from the common agricultural policy, but from the common fisheries policy, and free also to legislate to the highest standards. And I think this is a crucial thing for the House to grasp. I will give way with on fish. On fish,
Most great, my Ron, for giving way. Will he give the House a categorical assurance that we will not make the mistake of the 1970s and use our marine resources and fish stocks to be traded as a bargaining chip during the upcoming negotiations? Will he guarantee that we will take total 100% control of all our waters within the EEZ and all our resources, and like any other independent marine nation, will then indulge in common sense negotiations of a reciprocal nature with our marine neighbours on an annual basis?
Minister.
I can happily give my right honourable friend, who's campaigned long on these issues valiantly, that assurance, Mr. Speaker, and I can confirm that we will take back 100% control of the spectacular marine wealth of this country, not least the marine wealth of Scotland, which the SNP would discard as senselessly as superfluous catch dictated by the common fisheries policy itself, Mr. Speaker. This House will be free. This House will be free in just a moment. I will give way with pleasure in just a moment. This House will be free to legislate for the highest possible standards. And let me stress that nothing in this bill undermines workers' rights or this House's natural desire to protect our environment. On the contrary, I give way.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way, and I know the Prime Minister has been doing a very good job trying to reassure MPs like myself from towns that voted leave. But looking at workers' rights in this current document, can the Minister explain the loopholes around those workers' rights that don't give us the security that we would need regarding non-regression for communities like mine, manufacturing communities that need those workers' rights?
Minister.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady, and she raises an important point, and people will need reassurance about this. There can be no regression. The UK will maintain the highest possible standards, and let me perhaps make the point more clearly. If the EU decides that it wishes to introduce a new piece of legislation on social protection, then it is, of course, automatic that this House should consider. And as I say, there will be an amendable motion by which the government will give parliamentary time for the implementation of that measure. And that is the opportunity that this bill gives us. And in essence, it takes back to this House the powers to decide these matters. And I do not believe that we should shy away from these responsibilities or lack confidence in our collective ability to use these powers for the public good. Because it is thanks to the efforts of Labour and Conservative members that this House is already ensuring that this country does more to tackle climate change than almost any other country in the EU. Our environmental bill will enshrine the highest standards possible. I give way with pleasure to the Honourable Lady from Great Britain.
Thank you, Prime Minister. There is a difficulty. There is a fundamental issue of trust in his word, I'm sorry to say. So if the Prime Minister tells this House that he is committing to reviews of things